Good evening, everyone. Okay. On behalf of the St. Mary's County Democratic Central Committee, welcome to the second installment of our series, Shut Up and Listen, It's My Turn to Speak. Tonight's event will focus on the LGBTQIA+ individuals and their experience in the county. My name is Brandon Russell, and I will be your host this evening. I'd first like to thank our panelists for agreeing to be a part of this much needed discussion. Your bravery and willingness to speak out cannot go unmentioned. From Stonewall to the Trump administration's continued assault on our rights, the LGBTQIA+ community continues to face obstacles which seek to prohibit our equality. Trans people of color are being murdered at an alarming rate. We live in a world where our very right to exist is constantly questioned. It's conversations like this one that lead to change. Locally, our LGBTQIA+ community has experienced a tumultuous ride as well. The outcry over LGBTQIA+ inclusive programming at our local library grabbed headlines. Local elected officials said the events were targeting children with nefarious purposes. Last year at Southern Maryland Pride in Solomons, we were yelled at by passersby. They said we were sinners and should be ashamed. But these episodes only serve to bring into the light an undercurrent of hate that exists here. When I was 5 years old, I recognized that I was different from other kids around me. I didn't know what to call it, but I knew that I was gay. As I aged, I found myself with more female than male friends. I witnessed the few openly gay males at my school being ridiculed constantly, primarily by male classmates. I insulated myself in my friend group and tried to hide who I was every day. I came out at the age of 21 in 2008. I would have been in the closet a lot longer if I hadn't met my partner that year. Coming out was one of the hardest, most nerve-wracking things I have ever had to do. I felt completely alone. I had no LGBTQIA+ support system. I was incredibly worried I would deal a decimating blow to my life by telling the truth. Thankfully, that didn't happen to me, but it has happened to many others. We don't learn LGBTQIA+ history in school. We aren't taught about LGBTQIA+ relationships in sex education. Though we may have more rights under the law than we did a decade ago, we are still too far behind, and these rights often change from state to state. Depending on where you live, as an LGBTQIA+ person, you may face discrimination that seems unthinkable in 2020. 30 states do not protect all LGBTQIA+ people from discrimination in public and private workplaces. 28 states offer no protection against housing discrimination based on sexual orientation, while 30 states offer no protections based on gender identity. 32 states have no laws to protect LGBTQIA+ students against discrimination. 11 states have laws that allow state licensed agencies to claim religious exemptions and deny foster care or adoption to LGBTQIA+ families. Members of our community attempt suicide at a rate up to 4 times the national average. Gay and bisexual men are restricted from donating blood unless they wait 1 year after engaging in sex. These are just a few examples of the uphill battle our community faces. When we stay in the closet, we silence ourselves. When our history isn't taught openly, we are being silenced. When we have to consider whether to participate in an open discussion like this for fear of facing retribution, that is a threat that keeps us silent. I, like many others, internalized this threat. I let it rewire my brain so my self-worth plummeted. I thought I was worth less than my heteronormative counterparts in society. This is why pride is so important. It is necessary to see ourselves represented in the larger world to know that we have a place in it. I've experienced homophobic and anti-LGBTQIA+ rhetoric being used in my presence. I used to ignore it when this happened. I might have offered a dismissing smile because I didn't want to make the situation awkward or start a confrontation. I wasn't comfortable being my authentic self in front of most people. These, along with many others, are the reasons I stayed silent. What I realized was that being complicit in my own silence was not the answer. I understood that it was the person making the negative comment who was creating an awkward situation. My presence and later my rebuttal were not. Once I had that kernel of knowledge, there was no looking back. Don't be complicit in your own silence. You are not responsible for what other people think about you. You are responsible for guarding yourself against internalizing the societal threats we face every day. And when you can, speak up for others. Now, before I introduce our panelists, I'd like to define the LGBTQIA+ acronym. First is L, which stands for lesbian. This word is often used to describe female-identified people attracted romantically, sexually, and/or emotionally to other female-identified people. G for gay describes men who are attracted to other men in a romantic, sexual, and/or emotional sense. B or bisexual refers to someone who is attracted to all genders. Commonly, people refer to a bisexual as being attracted to someone who is either male or female, but this perpetuates the gender binary and can erase other members of our community. T stands for transgender, which describes people whose gender identity and/or gender expression differs from what is typically associated with the sex they were assigned at birth. Q is interchangeable, representing those who identify as queer or questioning. Queer defines the sexual preferences, orientations, and habits of the not exclusively heterosexual and monogamous majority. Questioning represents those unsure of their sexual orientation and/or gender identity and who are not sure where exactly they fit in the community just yet. The letter I refers to those who are intersex or people who are born with reproductive or sexual anatomy that doesn't fit the typical definitions of male and female. A is also interchangeable, covering those who identify as asexual or as an ally. Asexual people are those who do not feel a sexual attraction to others. These are not to be confused with aromantic or people who feel little to no romantic attraction to others. Asexual people are often romantically attracted to someone, but sexual attraction doesn't play a role in the relationship. Meanwhile, an ally is someone who confronts heterosexism, homophobia, biphobia, transphobia, and heterosexual and gender straight privilege in themselves and others. The plus at the end covers those identities that are not yet represented by a letter in the acronym. Some of those identities include panromantic, or someone who is emotionally and spiritually attracted to anyone, regardless of gender or gender identity, but is not sexually attracted to them. Non-binary, or someone who doesn't identify as fully male or female, but rather finds themselves in the middle of the gender spectrum. And finally, gender fluid, or someone whose gender identity or expression changes over time, which can be displayed by how someone dresses, expresses, or describes themselves. Our panelists tonight will speak for about 5 minutes each. After all panelists have finished speaking, we'll dedicate some time to answering audience questions. If you're part of the Zoom, you can submit your question in the chat box. If you're watching on Facebook, submit your question as a comment, and we'll do our best to get to as many questions as we can. Now, allow me to introduce our first panelist, Devin Land. Her pronouns are she and her. She's lived and worked in St. Mary's County and Calvert County for 13 years. She is the mother of a handsome 2-year-old son and is happily married to her wife of 7 years. Take it away, Devin.
Hi. So I'm nervous. Like he said, I have lived here in Maryland since 2007. I met my wife in 2008. We've been together since then. We got married in 2013. And at the time we got married, I think it was in August. And then shortly after, I think that's when it went legal, that it was legalized for us to marry legally. And so we ended up doing that in November here in Leonardtown. As far as for our our experience here in St. Mary's County, we're both fortunate enough to work in our companies where it's zero tolerance for any type of, discrimination. There's, they have the avenues for you to be able to report things that happen. I will say when I first started at that job, I did have a couple of issues with people having a problem with the person I was with coming to see me. And then there was a lot of talk, people coming to me saying, you need to be careful. And so I've always felt like I should never express who I am as far as who I am with a partner or anything, because I don't want that judgment. We deal with that guard up, and we've always had that guard up. Even me and my wife, we don't broadcast because you're afraid of what can happen to you or what can be said to you, or you potentially lose your job or anything like that. So it was very refreshing for me to go to that boss at the time and say, I don't know if this is a problem, but I am a lesbian. I do have a girlfriend. Is this a problem? And it was immediately eradicated, which I appreciated at that time. Even still, here in St. Mary's County, we haven't dealt with people coming to us with that hatred the way that I see them against men or transgenders. We haven't had that experience, luckily. Our problem has been since we've had a child. The problem is, who's the mom? I get asked that question. I make the appointment for my son for the doctor, and I say, well, his other mom wants to check and have these things looked at, and it's, what? What is that? I don't understand. I said, yeah, his other mom. I don't know what your question is, but we both have this child together. There was no man involved. We went through the whole avenues of having, artificial insemination and going through that whole process. We did all of this together. And so trying to explain that to people out here is sometimes frustrating, because it's like, this is the world. This isn't changing. This isn't going anywhere. And those are the struggles that we have. The most of the problem that we have more so is we have the problem of being, not a problem, I'm a Black woman, I'm a lesbian, and that's three things. I'm Black, I'm a woman, I'm a lesbian. So I got a lot going against me, and we're more uncomfortable with our color than we've had the experience here as far as our sex goes. So that's me, that's us. You may hear my child in the background at some point. My wife may have to come in and tag us out, but thank you.
Thank you, Devin. Next, we have Maria Sanchez Sokolowski. Her pronouns are she and her. She has lived in Southern Maryland for almost 8 years and has 3 children. Her 17-year-old daughter is asexual panromantic. Her 15-year-old son is heterosexual cisgender, and her 4-year-old son is gender fluid / non-binary. She is part of the board of directors for PFLAG Leonardtown, an adult advisor on St. Mary's County Youth Advisory Commission, and she is the chair of diversity and inclusion for the St. Mary's County Democratic Central Committee.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Brandon. As Brandon mentioned, my family and I have lived in St. Mary's County for almost 8 years. My husband and I were both born and raised in Southern California, and our 2 oldest children were born there as well. Growing up, I was really fortunate to have been exposed to all different sorts of cultures and lifestyles, which means that a good handful of my parents' friends, as well as many adult mentors, coaches, instructors that I had growing up were in the LGBTQ plus community. I had a large LGBTQ community at my high school as well. And as an adult, I worked for a very long time at a company who employs many queer individuals. So needless to say, my life has always been full of rainbows. 2 years ago, my now 17-year-old daughter officially came out to me via text one night. I had my suspicions for some time, but I wanted her to pick a time that was comfortable for her. So I let her address it first. So as Brandon mentioned, my daughter is asexual panromantic, which is a section of the LGBTQ community that has just recently begun to be discussed more. As Brandon said when he was going over verbiage, asexual individuals don't have traditional sexual feelings towards any gender. So I've had people ask me, how does she know she's not attracted to someone? Maybe she hasn't met the someone yet. I generally ask them when they have their first crush. It usually happens to us right around the time we enter elementary school, which was many moons ago for her. However, even though she's not sexually attracted to people, that doesn't mean she can't have romantic feelings toward someone, which is where the panromantic piece comes in. So panromantic individuals will date or marry gay, straight, trans, and gender fluid folks. Luckily, my daughter here in St. Mary's County has found an absolutely wonderful group of friends through school, social media, and the local PFLAG chapter. And she feels completely accepted and safe here. So far, she hasn't really gotten any negative interactions at school or the county, and even though she's an introvert, she doesn't exactly like advertise her sexual orientation. She wears rainbow flags. She's got a pair of rainbow Converse. She posts herself on social media at DC Pride, which we go to every year. So she's quasi out and proud, and I'm very proud of her. Around the same time that my eldest came out, my then almost 3-year-old son watched Frozen for the first time, and he fell in love with Elsa. Actually, he fell in love with her clothes, her confidence. And so he immediately asked me if I could make him a skirt. So I took a pair of his shorts and I ripped out the inseam, and voila, he had a skirt. It wasn't long, though, after that he started asking for a dress like Elsa's. So I went on Amazon and I bought him one. And one princess dress turned into 2, which turned into 5, which at last count, I think we have 15 or 20 princess dresses in his closet. One day at daycare, a couple of years ago, last year, the calendar said, dress like your favorite character day. And my son told me he wanted to dress like Elsa. So I spoke to the daycare director, and I was ready for a fight. I was ready to explain to them what gender fluid meant and have a battle. And I didn't need to have that because the response was amazing. The director told me that he could wear whatever he wanted and that they would have a conversation with any student that was unkind to him. So that morning we walked into daycare, and I had packed him a bag with boy clothes, and I called all day to make sure he was fine. And there was never any incident there. So these days he wears non-princess dresses as well. In fact, he's downstairs wearing one as we speak. He wears them at home. He wears them out in the community. The only people who have ever made a comment on it, so oddly enough, have been older adult women. The first time someone commented on him wearing a dress, without hesitation, he said, well, you're wearing pants and you're a girl and I like dresses and you like pants and that's okay. And I never prompted him. It was simply amazing. So he turns 5 pretty soon, in about 7 or 8 weeks. He's not indicated to my husband or I anything regarding his identity. So currently he is using he, him pronouns, and we just tell people he's gender fluid. And if that adjusts at any point in his life, then we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. But he knows that he has full support of his family and his siblings. And the community so far has been very accepting. And thank you very much for listening to my story.
Thanks so much for sharing your story and that of your children, Maria. We really appreciate it. Now we're going to hear from Jan Moore. Her pronouns are she and her, and she is the proud mother of a trans daughter.
Hi, I have a little bit of a hard time figuring out how to work the mute button on this thing. Thank you for the introduction. I am Jan Moore, and I have 4 children, 13, 11, 9.5, almost 10, and 5 years old. So our daughter came to us when she was 5 and told us that she is a girl. She was identified as male at birth. And so we supported her through that. I was asked to share some of my experiences with struggles in the community. So rather than boring you with the details of my daughter's transition, I would just say that it's very similar to Maria's, other than that she did absolutely self-identify at the age of 5. And at like 6 weeks from being 10, that has never, even for a single day, wavered. And I would also just add that these kids who are identifying at these early ages really are very confused about what the problem is and why everyone has these questions, and why they are misgendered and treated differently, have to go to the bathroom in different bathrooms and that kind of stuff. So one of the things that we experienced, particularly in St. Mary's County Public Schools, my daughter did transition in St. Mary's County Public Schools, and we had a vice principal who was absolutely amazing, and a beloved school nurse who just has had my back even to this day. He continues to write my daughter letters of encouragement, and they just seem to come at the right time. So while we have had a lot of support, we have also had our share of challenges. So the school was helpful in helping her change her pronouns. We generally didn't have any trouble with students. It was mostly with adults that we had our issues. We had an issue with a particular gym teacher who would line my daughter up in the boys line during gym. We also were forced to use the bathroom in the school nurse's office, which was, you know, something that we just kind of went with and didn't argue about. I struggle with that choice to this day, but when our wonderful school nurse was there, there was absolutely no issue. And honestly, it was an opportunity for her to check in and make sure that everything was going okay. Unfortunately, that nurse ended up leaving the school, and the next year a different nurse came in, and we had some major problems with that nurse. They were misgendering our daughter, even in April of the school year. She had started with the new school year, and even in the spring, she was misgendering our daughter. And my daughter was, they had left a handicap potty seat on the toilet, and she had to go to the bathroom on that toilet, and so she urinated all over herself. So in addition to being completely humiliated about having peed herself so bad that it was even in her shoes, the school nurse then misgendered her when we picked her up from school. And so I think that I would say that the school system has a long way to go. I think there's a lot of people who are trying really hard and who are very well intentioned, but we've got a long way to go. I mean, these kids should not be going to the bathroom in the nurse's bathroom. They should be able to go to the bathroom in their gender preference. You know, I mean, my daughter was in first grade. I mean, you don't even have the hormones to be sexually attracted to anybody, and that's completely beside the point, because a lot of people confuse gender identity with with sexual orientation, and they are two very different things. Now, I am going to be thrilled if my daughter is a lesbian. I would be thrilled if she's attracted to men, but to be honest with you, I don't care. And that has absolutely nothing to do with my 9.5-year-old daughter's gender identification. She simply sees herself as female. And when people ask me, oh, well, could she possibly have known this? I would tell you, I mean, when is your earliest memory of what your gender identification was? And did anybody ever question you about whether or not you were whatever gender you identify as? So that was a challenge. I will say that on the positive side of things, my husband and I are small business owners in the community, and we were incredibly scared of the business ramifications of our family coming out and living our true identity. And we have had an incredible groundswelling of support. And I think that people who don't want to be with us aren't. And those people who know how to celebrate our family and our child have been really wonderful. So we are very fortunate in that regard. We did end up pulling our daughter from the public school system. She's now in a private school that celebrates her for who she is and seeks answers to questions when people are not understanding, because this is a identification that has been taboo, that has been discriminated against. Like Brandon said at the beginning, trans women of color are being murdered at disproportionate rates. We have overt transphobia in not only St. Mary's County, but in the administration that we have in place and in our state and everywhere else. I will tell you that I am privy to information that my neighbors were actually discussing whether or not my daughter should have access to hormones or should be able to participate in sports. And I simply don't understand how these are even conversations that should be being had, or why these people think that they have any right to have input into my daughter's medical care. My response really was, well, if people want to talk about my daughter's access to medications, then let's all bring our medications to the community center and throw them on the table so we can have a round table of conversation about people's medication choices. Because it's really a private matter and has nothing to do with how she sees herself. I guess in closing, I would say that it's so important that we try to seek to understand people who are different than us and encourage that in our children so that they have empathy. And anybody who's on this call right now is clearly of that mindset. If you are part of our community, I celebrate you and appreciate your participation, and we're all in this together. If you're a person who is just an ally and who is chimed in for information and education, then thank you for being here, and thank you for seeking to understand and to reach across the aisle and look at people who are not necessarily living your same journey. So thank you so much for inviting me to do this.
Wow, thank you so much for that perspective, Jan. It was very necessary. I see a lot of people giving you rounds of applause. Next up, we have Cass, who is a 21-year-old transgender man whose pronouns are he and him. He has lived in St. Mary's County for all of his life. He attended Leonardtown High School as a student of the Global International Studies program. This program is a rigorous humanities and human rights-based course, and students in their senior year of the program present and advocate for a topic they have chosen to demonstrate all of the knowledge they've received in the program. Cass chose to advocate for the LGBTQ+ community in his senior year because he saw firsthand the lack of education that people have about our community. A year later, he attended the College of Southern Maryland, where he came out as transgender. And since that time, he has become president of the Beacon, the LGBTQ+ club on the Leonardtown campus. His current goal is to educate and help LGBTQ+ folks feel valid as themselves.
So thank you for that awesome introduction there. Yes, it is true. I have lived in this county my whole life, and it hasn't always been sunshine and rainbows. And the story I'm going to share with you is actually something that happened to me maybe about a month ago, less than a month ago. I don't know anymore. But my mom and I, we were going to the bank. I had a check that I was going to cash. So we went up to the drive-through, and my mom was in the driver's seat. I was in the passenger seat. So I put all my stuff in there, my ID, which still has my dead name on it and still has the female marker on it, which I haven't changed yet. And I also put in my other information, sent it through. And the lady that was helping us, she pulled it out, started typing in her computer, looked at my ID. Well, she then asked over the speaker to us, she asked, is insert my dead name here, the driver. And my mom turns around and says to the lady, no, my son is sitting right next to me, and he's the one that's on that card. So she sits there, she's staring at me like thoroughly confused. And right now I'm starting to panic. Like I was really panicking at this point because this is a bank, this is money, this is my livelihood. What do you think you're doing? Are you gonna like cancel my card, and are you gonna like try to get me for fraud of myself? So of course I'm sitting there and I'm freaking out. And you know, mom's just looking at me, trying to calm me down. And I mean, it's a drive-through, so they can hear you at the speaker box no matter what, or at least I'm gonna assume. So I started saying, ma'am, I'm trans, you know, this is kind of not cool. I'm trans. I don't look like my picture anymore. And she just kept staring at me. She called over her supervisor. And at this point, I am like on the edge of a panic attack. Like I am trying not to freak out. And I mean, this lady looks at her and I say, once again, I am trans. I don't look like my picture. Why is this happening to me? And I see the lady, the manager lady go, send it through. So she sends the transaction through. I get my little receipt. I give her everything back. And we drive to the store. And mom went in because at this point I was having a full-blown panic attack. I was freaking out. Like this hurt like nothing else. I felt invalidated. I felt like I wasn't seen. I felt like I wasn't being listened to. It just really hurt. So I ended up calling the bank. And I mean, that interaction turned my whole day around. The lady that picked up the phone, she was very sympathetic. She basically put a note on my account saying that I'm transgender and I don't look like my ID anymore, you know. And I remember her saying, you know, like, I'm so sorry that this happened to you. And I'm like, well, I would say it's okay, but it's not okay. And she's like, you're absolutely right. It's not okay. And you know what? Be you and be happy as you. So that's all I really have to say about my story. And yeah, there it is.
Okay. Thank you for sharing your story tonight with us, Cass. We really appreciate your being here. Next up, we have Nicholas Hebb. His pronouns are he and him. And Nicholas is a 22-year-old makeup artist and part-time drag queen who has lived in St. Mary's County for over 11 years. He is an active member in the local LGBTQ+ community.
Hello, thank you for inviting me here today. Again, my name is Nick. I was born and raised here until the age of 7, had to leave for a few years, and then came back at the age of 12 to finish high school, and I've been here ever since. So on and off, I was raised here and lived here, and now I've lived here as an adult. Um, so it is my hometown in a way. I was just away for a few years. Um, I'm hearing all these stories and I'm getting all these perspectives. I'm taking these notes down and I'm trying not to necessarily overstep anyone, and I don't want to say anything that I really shouldn't when it comes to certain projects, but I can tell my story and explain what I have experienced going through the community as a teenager into adult, and from my childhood perspective to show some of the issues with the community that I have witnessed. Um, as far as I'm concerned, when I was younger growing up, I was, like it was said, I believe in the first section of the meeting, that you realize you're very different than anyone else and nobody wants to hang out with you. They've got, boys on this side, girls on that side, and then you don't want to, I didn't personally want to hang out with the boys because they were too rowdy for me, and then the girls didn't want to hang out with me because I was a boy. So, it was one of those find yourself in betweens ever since, being a young child. And, but fast forward, I am a gay male. I have identified as gay ever since I was, I believe, 12. I did come out at the age of 12, and I was out all through high school. I didn't experience many issues in high school. Middle school was more of the struggle time. Um, Middle school definitely presented some challenges with more of the male population in the 8th grade when I had first come back from leaving. And then fast forward again, I had graduated. I had plenty of friends. I didn't have really a super hard time with anyone in my high school experience, but as I graduated and got a little older, I started exploring the art of drag and transforming myself into my alter ego, Angelica Lies. Um, and as I stepped into that moment, I stepped into the fact of I have now this access to the community in a way that was different from before. It's not just me being a gay male anymore. I realized I'm stepping forward as, in a way, a genderqueer artist that is speaking out against those who don't understand what's going on with our community. And my main problem is the drag queen story hour that had been taking place at Lexington Park Library last summer. There was a lot of backlash relating to the story hour. I really forget which name it is, but the Activist Mommy is a very large, and I believe Christian or Catholic based group led by one woman who is very active in shutting down LGBT plus issues. She did everything she could to shut down our drag queen story hour because she felt it was wrong. I believe the number one problem in the community in St. Mary's, at least, is misinformation and ignorance. And I don't mean ignorance as in people are, being nasty, being stupid. I mean blatant ignorance, to where you choose not to learn about something that you don't know about. You just choose to impose your opinion or impose the way you feel and directly react instead of learning about something that isn't closer to you or something that you know about. If I don't know about something, I'm going to learn about it to understand what's going on. I'm not going to act out of fear. That's a big thing, I think, in the community down here for St. Mary's, is just a large amount of fear that people really don't know. But with the story hour, that being said, there was activists from Christian churches, Catholic churches that were standing outside telling us we were going to hell. We're converting their children. We're teaching them about sexual things, talking about whatnot. And they were all very against the story hour because they were misinformed and uneducated about what we were doing, which was reading children's level books to children. I was one of the performers. I stood there and read these books with my counterpart, Stormy, at the time. We both read books to the children and we made crafts and everyone went home. A man did bust through security and was yelling profanities. He was arrested and everything went back to the way it was. But again, I believe there is a very large problem in the community with misinformation and uneducation about the community and what we serve. I think if anything, that should be part of what needs to happen. Is a lot of education needs to be done, because people don't know about us, they're automatically going to be afraid of us. And that's something that I want to stand up for, is educating people. I think that's about it. Thank you again for inviting me and hearing my spiel. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for sharing your perspective with us, Nick. I was there at the Drag Queen Story Hour, so I'm very familiar with how that went, and it's nice to have a perspective from somebody who was directly involved with that event. Next up, we have Laura Hart. Her pronouns are she and hers. Laura was part of the planning committee for the first Capitol Trans Pride in 2008. She received the Engendered Spirit Award at Capitol Trans Pride in 2009 for her efforts in protecting Montgomery County's gender identity anti-discrimination ordinance. She has volunteered for more than 2 years with the United ENDA Coalition, providing computer services and lobbying Congress. She is a former member of Equality Maryland, which at the time was Maryland's largest LGBTQ advocacy group. She is a member of the St. Mary's County Democratic Central Committee and became one of the first trans people to win an election at any level in Maryland. Welcome, Laura.
Well, thank you. I think, as a lot of other people have said on this call, I kind of knew something at a very young age. I don't think that I ever remember a point in my life that I didn't know that there was something different. There was no language. I grew up in the 50s and there was no language for it. And so it's just a lot of confusion as you grow up and try to figure out how you fit into society. The way that people used to transition in the 70s and 80s and 90s and even into the 21st century is that you kind of break contact with all of your family and all of your friends and just start a new life. But my family, I could never bring myself to walk away from them. So you live in closets, you live in hiding, you express your gender identity to yourself behind closed curtains. It's a crappy way to live, but you know, I thought that I had it kind of under control. When I retired in 2006, all of a sudden things really just changed. I mean, I just was emotionally collapsed. I looked at a future that was going to be almost an agoraphobic type of future, just staying in a house, and it was like, I need to be a part of the world that I live in. And so the first person that I told that I was transitioning was my sister. And I think, like everyone else, her basic reaction was, well, that explains a lot, because we always talked about some of the things that you did that just didn't really fit. So then she was kind of like my inroad to tell my family in the Philadelphia area. So in the spring of 2007, I wrote 2 letters. I wrote one letter to my sister-in-law, Phyllis, And I wrote another letter to my niece Karen, who's the oldest child of my brother George. I really did not believe that my brother George would be okay with this, but you just simply never know. And both letters got lost in the mail. You know, it's just incredible that something like that would happen. And so a week passes and I don't hear anything. And I called up my sister and she didn't hear anything. And so I'm in just total panic mode. Until one day my niece Karen called me up and called me, hello, Aunt Laura, how are you? For kind of like the first time ever. And we had a pleasant conversation. And she ended up calling over to my sister-in-law, Phyllis, who was the target of the other letter. And I was sitting at home. It's like about 8:30 at night and my phone rings. And it's my sister-in-law, Phyllis. And we kind of danced around the issue for a while. And then she said, so I understand that there was a letter and what was in the letter. And I said, yes. And she said, I didn't want you to go to bed tonight without knowing that it's okay. How many times I tell that story and I can't get through it ever. My family is my rock. Everything that I've done in the time after my transition, all of the political activities, all the lobbying, all of the planning things, all of the struggle, that is my rock. That is why I can do things that I do. And that's why I will always do the things that I do. And I think that's all I have to say.
Wow, thank you so much, Laura. That was really powerful. The joy that I heard in your voice when you talked about being called Aunt Laura for the first time was like contagious. I felt it. So thank you so much for that. Next up, we have Steve Tuttle, and his pronouns are he and him. Excuse me. Steve graduated from Arundel Senior High in 1996 and also came out the same year. He joined the Navy on November 17, 2001 during Don't Ask, Don't Tell, because he wanted to serve his country after the attacks on September 11th. He served as a parachute rigger until November 2012. During his 11 years in the Navy, he was awarded the Global War on Terrorism Expeditionary Medal, along with a Kosovo Campaign Medal, 2 Sea Service Awards, and a Navy Achievement Medal. After his service, he returned to California, Maryland, here locally, where he married his husband. He has worked as a contractor at Pax River for the last 8 years. He serves on 2 HOAs and volunteers to help the homeless in St. Mary's County find emergency shelter. He is also a member of the Democratic Central Committee for St. Mary's County.
Good evening. Thank you for everyone before me who's already spoken. I've had to dry my eyes a couple times. So just know that no matter what, keep up the fight. The fight never stops. A few years ago when I moved back, I wanted to marry my husband, settle in and kind of retire and stop the fight for LGBT rights and let everybody else do it for me. It was time for the younger generation to step up. I was wrong. I'm stepping up. I'm going to help you fight. And the fight will always go on. I was forced out in 1995 in my English class at Arundel Senior High, where there was a student in the class. We had to recite Shakespeare's sonnet, Shall I Compare Thee to a Summer's Day? And then we had to make our own version. And the kid said, Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? We all know Steve Tuttle is gay. And of course, me being the loudmouth kid I've always been, I spoke up and said, yes, what are you going to do about it? Let's meet outside. And then when I whoop your butt, you can tell all your friends that you got beat up by a gay guy. Crowd hushed, and that was the end of it. And that was the first day of a long journey of almost 43 years of fighting. Yes, I knew I was different when I was young. It was wrong back then, growing up in a Baptist household. But you learn to keep it hidden until my senior year in high school. And then once I was out, it was like I kicked the door open and I kept running. I did my first gay pride in the summer of '96. I did Advocates for Youth my senior year and spoke at Capitol Hill. I don't ask, don't tell, not voted on, met several elected officials, was graciously called a faggot by Senator Helms. And we tried to convince him to vote, although we know he wasn't going to vote for the bill. He was. Fast forward a few years, I joined the Navy right after 9/11. I knew I was joining during Don't Ask to do what I had to do to this country because it's my right, just like everyone else's, to serve, no matter who you love or how you identify. That the last deployment before I got there, they had found out someone was gay and threw him overboard while the ship was in motion. Was able to serve 11 amazing years. People knew I was gay. They liked it. It was a kept secret. And then 2011, Don't Ask, Don't Tell was abolished. I got out a year later, moved to Maryland, where I anxiously waited for the voters of Maryland to pass the same-sex marriage. And as soon as it was legalized in January of 2013, we rushed down to the courthouse to go get our marriage license and got married in our condo because we thought that the voters would have remorse or the elected officials would try to overturn it. So we knew if we got married, they would have to grandfather us. Later on, the Supreme Court rules in favor, and then we have a nice reception in Leonardtown at the front porch. But every business we had to ask, either the cake maker, the florist, the photographer, hey, this is going to be a gay wedding. Are you okay with that? Because we just didn't want any drama. No one should ever have to ask that question. It should just be an automatic, hey, this is a wedding. It doesn't matter what type of wedding, gay, straight, trans, whatever. But after the library fiasco, I thought, I can't just lay down and not help my community. I've got to stand up. Joined PFLAG. I was appointed by the Democratic Central Committee in July of last year. And then I'm now on the PFLAG board because I've got to continue the fight. And the fight's real. We are a year later in June. I've got one of the county commissioners to proclaim or to submit to the rest of the county commissioners to proclaim June of 2020 in St. Mary's County Gay Pride or LGBTQIA month. And we got it done. So the fight can be won. Education and educating the ignorant will always be part of your life. That's never going to change until everyone is educated. Yes, when I go to the hospital, what is your wife's name? You mean husband? I word it in such a way where it makes them feel like an idiot. Oh, I'm sorry for assuming. You get that question now. You know, you got to put it back on them. Ignorance is not always an attack at you. Ignorance sometimes is just the not knowing or just not thinking before you speak, which I'm good at doing that as well. So if someone misidentifies you or thinks you're straight and you're not, just put it back in their field and don't make them feel stupid, but put it in a way like, you mean husband, you mean he, you mean she. You know, what's really hard for our community is we have no history. The AIDS crisis wiped out a generation of older people that we would have gotten our history from. You know, the younger generation would talk to the older gays and they would pass down all the lobbying and they would give them kind of like the pass down of the future, saying, hey, we're retiring, here's the torch, it's your turn now. But in the 80s and 90s, we lost a lot of people to the AIDS crisis, so we don't have that pass down. So we need to know our history. We need to know the milestones that we did to make our country, community, and better. We've come a long, long way since 1995. We have a long way to go. We need to make sure we elect a president that keeps moving forward and not backward. And let's be vigilant and just keep educating. And I thank you, everybody who is watching, and all the panelists for your time and your courage to do that. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for sharing, Steve. We appreciate you being here with us tonight. We have a few questions that have come in from the audience. They're not directed at any one particular panelist. So if you feel like you have an answer or you would like to address the question, please jump in. The first question we have is, what do you think the schools could do differently to educate both students and staff about the LGBTQIA+ community?
I would really like to jump in here. Basically, one of the easiest things to do is put it in health class. I mean, I remember going through high school, it wasn't that long ago. I graduated in 2017. And, you know, the easiest thing to do is just put it in health class where they teach sexual education, where they teach, you know, about the parts of the body. And it's only straight education, by the way. They don't teach anything about the LGBTQ community whatsoever. So it would really help us to get a leg up in the school system, especially in health classes. And I mean, that's where it all starts.
I agree. I think that's 100% what Cass says, is that when I took sex education my senior year as a blow-off course, the teacher taught there's 4 forms of sex, only 2 involve love. I'm like, what? He says there's heterosexuality, which involves love, and there's homosexuality, which involves love. I'm like, what? This is 1996. And then there was the other 2, which I think was autosexuality or something like that, or in bestiality. But that was the kind of sex education class that I got in 1995, because we were losing men and women in this country, dropping like flies to the AIDS crisis. The administration after Clinton, which was Bush, wiped all that out. So we don't teach realistic health and sex education in this country, not only just St. Mary's County, but in this country, to identify and to address those issues in a respectfully, in an educational way. And what we need to do is we need to get the church out of sex education and let them teach their kids how they want to teach, and let the public school teach sex education and health in a way that is going to give our children the proper tools in their toolbox to be productive in society.
So I'd like to also jump in, if that's okay. I think that the health education situation is pretty dire, and have to agree with Steve and Cass wholeheartedly. I am fortunate enough to have had some influence over the school that my daughter currently goes to, and they have adopted a sex ed program that they're incorporating through from kindergarten all the way through 8th grade, which is what grade our school goes to. And it is not necessarily overt sexual education about, okay, this is what a transgender person does when they are, when they're in those lower grades. It really is just in making sure that there's room for everyone. We need to make sure that we are talking outside of the binary, and we are talking about things other than heteronormative relationships, and leaving room for those other people in the spectrum. I would also like to add that it is not limited to health education. It's also in science. I went in for orientation for my middle schooler, and the science teacher was talking about what they were going to learn this year. And they were going to learn about genetics and Mendel's P's and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, holy crap, like, what would my daughter think of that? Well, what would her brothers think of that either? If everybody's either an X or a Y, or 2 X's or 2 Y's, or whatever it is, X, Y, you know, I mean, where does my kid fall in all of that? And so, I mean, from the standpoint, not just of health education, but in many aspects of schooling, we are marginalizing people, even unintentionally. I mean, these microaggressions really harm the mental health and well-being of people in the LGBTQIA community. And so I think that we need to look at it not just as health education, because everybody thinks of health education as sex. Okay, I'm not necessarily talking about sex. I am talking about inclusion for people who are just different than the black and white that we have been programmed to say is what is important and what is normal. And I mean, even Devin was talking about as a woman of color, and I know that her wife is also is not necessarily the white heterosexual middle class. She doesn't fit in those categories either, and we need to leave room for those, all of these beautiful parts of the mosaic that make up the beauty of who we are, and start celebrating those things rather than saying, okay, it's us and them. So I think that we need to look at history classes, and we need to look at science, and we need to look at health and all of these things, and try to talk about, like, you know what, how do we get empathy going in these schools? How do we garner support for people who are being hurt? How do we include people who don't fit in the group? I also would encourage schools to educate parents and offer education. If parents want education, come and get it. Let's talk about the beauty of diversity. Let's talk about the beauty of the gender mosaic and the love mosaic, quite honestly. Let's talk about resources for parents so that they can talk and educate their kids at home, even if they aren't part of the community, so that they can then take that home and educate their children so that we can help change the dynamic and the dialogue. Because we don't need to be people who are scary, and we're not men who are raping children in bathrooms. That is absolutely ludicrous. So we need to open the dialogue and talk about, okay, how do we educate? You have access to people and parents like most places don't. And so how do we pivot and change the dialogue? Thank you for listening to me.
Does anybody have anything to add before we move on?
Yeah, I'd like to add
Okay.
things.
Sure.
You're talking about education. There have been studies. They're all post-mortem studies, and so medical imagery isn't up to the task just yet. It needs to get finer. But one of the things that the post-mortem studies of trans people show is that the brain structure of the hypothalamus is consistent with the gender that they identify with, not the gender that assigned at birth. So there's very much, at least in the trans community, there is a physiological reason for why we exist.
So
when
Laura,
we're talking about, yes.
Not to interrupt you, but I guess where I'm coming from with my beautiful, amazing daughter who is created perfectly by God or whoever you believe in, I hear you and I agree with you on the science, 1000%. But I question why we need to justify our existence. Why do we even need to make that a thing? Why do we need studies on the hypothalamus in order to justify who we are and how we identify? So I struggle with, I had a person, when Cameron first came out, her very best friend was a little girl, and Cameron was just really wanted to play with her, and, you know, let's go see their dogs and all normal stuff. And I took her to Bob Evans, her mom to Bob Evans one morning. And I said, you know, I've got to like garner the support of some allies. And so I sat down with her and I said, look, this is our truth. And I hope that you can accept it. And she said, well, have you done any genetic testing to see if she has a chromosome abnormality? And like Cass said, I fall into the trap of trying to appease these people who are discriminating against us. And so I'm like, oh, wow, yeah, no, I mean, I hadn't thought of that. And then, you know, after 5 minutes, I'm like, oh my God, why did I even just talk about that or entertain that? Like, why am I trying to justify my daughter's existence? Why does it matter if she has a genetic test or her chromosomes say this or that? Like, we are who we are, and we should be able to say that we are who we are. I mean, if I wanted to change my hair color to red, I should have the right to do that. I don't need to have a study that says, oh, that I should be able to do that because that's what my leaning is towards. So Laura, I totally agree with you and support you. So I don't want you to feel like I am putting you down or in any way. I just struggle with the fact that it's not okay for us to just be who we are. So, I mean, I'll stop talking. Thank you for listening.
I think I think those were both really good points. If I can just jump in a little bit myself, I think Laura's point about the science behind it is very important because there are people out there that need that to be legitimized in order to start thinking about accepting our community as part of the community of the world. But I also definitely agree with Jan's point that we don't really need to legitimize ourselves for anyone else. We need to legitimize ourselves for ourselves and make sure that we're strong people. So that's my 2 cents. I definitely think that both points are important. Bear with me as I pull up the questions again. Okay, our next question, again for anyone, is what advice do you have for people who work out in the community at a bank or at a grocery store, or people that you may come into contact with that may have an issue with who you are or what your ID looks like in Cass's example, or anything else like that?
I think, you know, no matter where you go in life, you're going to have someone's going to have a problem with you, and you can't make everybody happy, so don't try. But when you're in a service industry, restaurant, bank, and somebody either, number one, misidentifies you or has a problem with it, well, you either go to the next register, don't start a confrontation, and then speak to the manager. I mean, address it in a way that you don't make a scene. You know, and if it's just plain hatred, well, I'm a firm believer in karma. So it's happened many times, especially when I'm in the medical field, which is shocking because you think the medical field will be very current with everything. You know, you have to correct doctors all the time. Well, you know, you should talk to your wife about this. Right there on my chart, I'm a gay man. It means I'm married to a man. Philip Wentz right there. That's my husband. Oh, it says emergency contact. I said, and underneath it says husband. Oh, I didn't see that. You know, you got to kind of point it out, be kind of diligent about it or direct, and then don't give them any wiggle room. I've had a waiter say, actually, no, as a matter of fact, I've had a dentist that said that they would not work on me. And I said, that's fine. I got right out of the chair and walked out. And he said, where are you going? I said, you don't want to work on me. You're not going to have my business. But I said, I will call my insurance company and tell them that you do not serve gay people and you will lose their insurance. And that dentist sang a different tune the next time he saw me, but he never worked on my mouth again. You know, you challenge them, but challenge them in a way to kind of put it back on them to make them look the ignorant one, because we shouldn't, like Jan said, we shouldn't have to validate ourselves. The validation that we are human beings is all we need in God's eyes. And no matter what people's religious views or personal preference or whatever, you are you. God made you in the way, if you believe in a God, or your creator made you in a way that was the way they wanted you to be. So, I mean, because I came at Southern Baptist, I mean, every Sunday is hell and brimstone. If you were a homosexual, you were going to burn in hell. But what's really funny is that after, you know, you weren't supposed to drink or gamble either, but you saw most of the parishioners at the bar gambling. So, you know, sometimes a lot of people are just hypocritical, and today is the day, if you are not doing it now, is to call out the hypocrisy and call people out in a way that's not degrading to them, where it makes you look like the bad person, where their ignorance comes full blown and everyone's kind of looking like, ooh, that's really ignorant. And that's how I do it. If it's a bank teller, and then if it's really nasty and they're real ignorant about it, well, you know what? Me, my friends, and everybody I can talk to is not going to do business with you again.
Well, I'm not sure how many people know this, but I work at Starbucks, so I get the other side of the counter's viewpoint. So, I mean, I have people day in, day out misgendering me, calling me ma'am, calling me she, and I'm talking about customers here because I work for Starbucks. Everybody's pretty inclusive, or at least my coworkers are. But I've had those fun conversations with customers. They're like, "How you doing, ma'am?" And I'm like, and I turn around and of course here I am, with a beard and a mustache. And I'm like, you want to try that again? And they usually look at me and they're like, "Oh my gosh, I am so sorry." And I'm like, I hear it all the time. There's nothing I can do to really tell you guys otherwise without really endangering myself and worrying about my own safety, because that's always been my top concern. But I just let it roll for the most part. Yes, it does get under my skin. And yes, it is very annoying to hear, "Oh, sorry, ma'am. Hey, ma'am, ma'am," all day. But at the same time, these are people you don't know, and they're probably not going to see you again unless they're regulars. And the regulars know better. So there are good people out there. It's just the uneducated ones and the ignorant ones that you got to worry about.
So I just want to add one more thing. I hope I'm not monopolizing the conversation too much, but I had an employee that was trans, and she was pulled over by the police, and had a difficult experience, to say the least. And so I think that when a person's identity doesn't match what's on their driver's license, or the gender specific name that I don't know even how to say that, but if they have a traditional girl name or a traditional boy name and it doesn't match, like, people get all confused, and things can become really dicey. So my daughter transitioned really early, and she's still very young, and so we haven't had the overt discrimination. We experience things once people understand what her situation is. But I think that we should all be trying to work towards making legislation easier for these people. Now, we're in the state of Maryland. We're very fortunate. I only had to go in front of a judge and to get her gender identity and her name changed. The only thing I had to do was take out an ad in the newspaper and allow it to run for a certain number of weeks, so that anyone who wanted to comment on this name change or this gender identity change had the opportunity to do so, so that they could contest it. This is reality in the state of Maryland. In many states, you're not even allowed to change your name or your gender identity from what is on your original birth certificate. So we're actually very lucky that we live in a state where we can do that. We just have to humiliate ourselves and out ourselves publicly in order to make that happen. Thank you for listening.
Maria, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think that being the other parent of a child who may at some point transition, or at the very least is gender fluid and non-binary right now, we come from a little bit of a different situation where he is clearly one gender whose clothing does not fit the supposed gender in which he is identifying with, right? So I feel like, I don't know where my son got his elevator speech from. I clearly did not give it to him. But I would like to think that maybe at some point I said something like that to somebody and he picked up on it. I am straight, cisgendered, and I don't like dresses. I simply don't think they're comfortable. So I wear pants all the time. And I think at some point he may have asked me, "Mommy, can I go into your closet and put on a dress?" And I said, "Good luck finding one. Mommy doesn't like dresses. I like pants. But you like dresses, and there's nothing wrong with that." So I feel like right now I'm fortunate enough where the couple of occasions where we've had somebody misgender him or ask a question out in public, which is such an odd thing because we preach at the church of mind your own business in my house. So when somebody comes up to us and says something to a complete stranger, especially a toddler, it's very odd. But I feel like he has taken it upon himself to speak up for himself and not let his parent have to do it for him. He's never looked at me for questions. He's just come out and started talking to adults about what he's doing. A part of that might be because he is in a house full of adults. His oldest, his second nearest sibling is 10 years older than him. So he's used to being spoken to like an adult. I know that will change at some point. The older he gets, or if he does transition, the conversation will be different. But I feel like what I can do is just let him speak and be the backup for him if he needs it. And also to not just be part of the LGBTQ community when I'm out with my LGBTQ children. So today I was out doing things wearing my rainbow shirt. I will wear other PFLAG related or LGBTQ community attire or things of that nature while I'm just out by myself, just to be a supporter of my friends and my family that are in the community, because that way, if somebody wants to have a conversation with me, whether they know me or if they're a complete stranger, then I don't have to feel like I'm speaking for somebody else that's with me, if that makes any sense. So there are many different conversations as an adult that you can have with an adult rather than as the child is having with the adult. But I feel like right now he is very good at shutting people down with simple, short statements. This is what I like. This is what you like. There's nothing wrong with that. Thank you for your time. And he just kind of walks away. So maybe we should all take a beat from that and don't get offended. Just explain it with simple, short sentences and then let that be the end. So that's all I have to say.
All right, so we've got a little bit of time left for one more question here. And I think this is actually probably, a really good closing question. For anyone who is watching now or may watch this in the future, what would our panelists say to them if they're looking for a place to get started with their education about our community? What is your advice?
I'll talk real quick and then I'll go away. It depends on what you want to learn and why you want to learn it, right? So if you are an ally, PFLAG, I'm going to self-promote, is a wonderful resource. So if anybody who doesn't know what that stands for, it's Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays, but includes everybody, right? So we have allies in our local PFLAG chapter. We have parents, we have gay, lesbian, trans, gender fluid people in our group. That is a wonderful resource to reach out to just for general questions. If you are a parent of, or your child has a friend that is LGBTQ, there are so many wonderful books, children's books, that you could go to. Nicholas could tell you some of those because he read some awesome ones at the Drag Queen Story Hour. And also he did a virtual one during quarantine, which was amazing. So if he wants to jump in and talk about those books, because those are great. But I love 2020 because there are so many wonderful resources for parents, especially, or like I said, if you're an adult that wants to teach children. I just happened to grab some. So this is one that we read in my house. It's called Jacob's New Dress by Sarah and Ian Hoffman. We love reading this book because it doesn't talk about gay, lesbian, trans. It just talks about a boy who likes to wear dresses. And if that's the gateway, the in to speaking and having larger conversation about those type of topics with people, then that's a perfect book. We also have this one called Harrison Dwight, Ballerina and Knight. And then there is a girls a compendium with this one that we don't have, but Rachel McFarlane, who's Seth MacFarlane's sister from Family Guy, does this book. And then if you're an older person or teen, there's a wonderful first person book called Sissy, a coming of gender story by Jacob Tobiah, who is a wonderful gender fluid author and activist. So I would recommend any of those. And if you just see somebody walking around with a lovely heart shirt like me in the community, come talk to us. We promise we don't bite. That's all.
So I'm going to jump in here as well. I have used several sources of education throughout my time. I have had the esteemed privilege of presenting at a LGBTQ conference at my college up in Prince Frederick. And I mean, it was fantastic. And one of the sources that I always highly recommend is Planned Parenthood. They're not always about abortions. They do women's care, they do men's care. And now in Maryland, they rolled out hormone replacement therapy care. And if you're looking for that, you just need to drive to Waldorf. But anyways, there are wonderful sources out there on the web from Planned Parenthood, from Gleason, from It Gets Better, from the Trevor Project, which I also highly recommend. So there are other sources out there, and just got to take advantage of them.
So for me, I joined a support group right when it came out. It was called, in Baltimore City, called Sufficient. And back in those days, there was gay and lesbian bookstores, believe it or not, called Lambda Rising. The first book I read was called Joining the Tribe, a book by Linu Du, and it was talking about joining the LGBTQ community as a young adult, like 18, 20. And that kind of opened my eyes and educated me, and not an educational book way, but just how to navigate a community at a young age. But for me, I got a lot of my history and education from the older generation that was still around. I've gone to Stonewall, and believe it or not, I recommend everybody, when COVID is over with, to get on the train, get on a bus, take the car, go to Stonewall, walk in that bar, and you will get all the history. You know how the movement started. And it, I have a confession to make. My generation and the generations above me, we left out of we forgot about the trans community. We focused on AIDS, don't ask, don't tell, and same-sex marriage. And the trans community really got pushed to the back, and that's our fault. Now we're paying the price for that. So for me, I'm learning a lot of things, not to say pronouns. I'm doing a lot of catch up, and I'm learning, but sometimes I mess up. And so I get real frustrated, but I can't say that, and I get more frazzled than I am. But really, most of my history and everything, and some of the best history who started to transition, who have seen more, and those stories really to learn and dive into history and find knowledge. And of course, on top of all that, with friends who died from AIDS, give me their history and where they came from in the fight. It's how I did it. But now we've got.
Okay, Steve, I'm thinking that you're done. You're kind of breaking up a little bit. I hope you are, because I don't want to be rude and cut you off. But I did see that Nick had, okay, good. I did see that Nick had his hand up. So Nick, do you have something to add?
Yes, yes, I do. I just wanted to mention a little bit about the story hour, since I kind of got a little off topic there for a minute when I was speaking. As far as the question being concerned with, what kind of resources are available for learning about the community when you don't know, I do want to put my hand up as part of the younger generation and do say that check where you're going, but the internet is a wonderful place to find education on everything. And then take that with a grain of salt, because there are things that you're going to read that aren't going to apply to everyone with this wide spectrum of information. But again, as far as the internet is concerned as well, you also have, like I had been in the now virtual, but used to be in person as well, the story hours for drag queens for younger kids. If you think your child, you know, may have tendencies that aren't the heteronormative or straight up black and white regular situation, you may want to take them, which is what another panelist friend of mine, Maria, had done. I met their child at the original story hour last summer, and they were just so ecstatic to see me, who was, you know, essentially a big boy in a dress, you know, by someone who's younger and chooses to wear the dresses. So it's very good to come out and see these events for what they are and not what people say they are. Make sure you always take everything with a grain of salt, because at the end of the day, we're all just human beings, and not all of us are scary, especially in this community. I've met some very beautiful and open people who are willing to help anyone. So do try to keep in mind where you're looking based on your age groups and where you're going from there. But yeah, that's about all I had to say, I think.
And I'd like to add real quick to what Nicholas just said. Almost more lovely than seeing the kids that, like my child that identified with Nicholas specifically at the Drag Queen Story Hour, were just kids that were just there to hear stories. We had so many children who did not identify as LGBTQ that were just there to listen to stories about inclusion and love and friendship, and had good parents who were teaching them that they need to learn about love and inclusion and that everybody's different. And I feel like that was the best part of the story hour.
Okay. Thank you for sharing, answering that question there. I do want to slip in one more question because it's a really good one. So we might go a few minutes past 8:30. But before I do that, I also had somebody write in and say that they would love to see Nick perform in drag at the Skipjack Gala coming up. So I don't know if that's something that he may be interested in, but keep it on your radar. And our last question that I think is also really important is what should someone do if they are out in public and they see someone who is part of the LGBTQIA community getting accosted or, you know, verbally accosted or whatever? What should somebody who's out and about and sees that do? Should they jump right in and try to stop it, stand you know, with the person as backup, or does anybody have any suggestions about how to navigate that situation?
That's a very sticky one, man. On one hand, it depends on what's going on. Like for me, honestly, I would jump right in. I call the police first, but I jump right in and I just be like, look, you know, I drag the person away. I'd speak for them and I would stand up for them, because I've had times where nobody was there to stand up for me. And you know what? It makes all the difference in the world to have somebody at least look at you and say, hey, this is not okay. And you know, you're not alone in this. We've all been there at least once or twice.
Can you guys hear me? So,
Yeah.
first of all, if you're with friends, have your friend call 911, and then I am a person that would probably jump in and before thinking about it, because precious moments count, and sometimes it takes 911 a while to get to where you're at. I've had to do it on several occasions, and you know what? We are not only advocates for ourselves, being in this community, but And sometimes that advocacy, you have to put your body between you and someone else's in order to save a life. But never put your life in grave danger. Personally, I would probably put my life in grave danger, but that's just me. That's my personal decision. Because precious moments count. Be smart about it. But usually, when you have another gay person interact and challenge the bully or the attacker, you've thrown them so off guard because there is still that stereotype that gays, the LGBTQIA community, are weak and they're use the word, don't get offended anybody, they're weak and they're pansies. And we're not. We're not like that. And when you challenge them and they're caught off guard. And it's happened more than on one occasion for me where I stepped in. You know, I even stepped in uniform once and defended other sailor who was being gay bashed. And when they saw Tuttle get in, they were like, it was amazing. And I was at the help them get away from the situation. So, but I mean, but at the same time, sometimes calling 911 or 911 takes too long in precious moments.
Would anybody like to add anything before we wrap up?
I would like to add something. I just want to mention, it's something that's been brought up maybe twice now since we've gone through, but just to reiterate for the most importance, depending on how someone is being attacked in public, yes, their safety is important, but so is yours. So you should absolutely step in if you are able. If you are unable or if a situation is unsafe, of course, there's 911 to call. But again, like's been said, it's going to take too long in certain cases. My highest recommendation, especially in the situation of which, even in the story hour, when we had our barge in, is find a way to be there with the person. If it will cause you physical harm, I would not say jump in, but honestly, like myself and others have said, we probably would. Get yourself somewhere safe if that is the problem. Go somewhere public where they can't make a scene, or if they do make a scene, someone might actually stop them that has the physical capability if you do not. But never let someone just sit there and yell at someone or accost them for being part of the community. It's basic disrespect to come off to someone in that way and harass them for being themselves. It's basic disrespect of human life to come after someone who has done nothing to you for the simple reason that you don't like what they're doing. So yes, always be involved, but make sure you're safe and get yourself to somewhere in a public space if you can. If you cannot, do stall and find the nearest emergency exits and whatnot. That's all I really wanted to say, to make sure people knew to stay, when in a situation like that, stay in a public area to make sure you are safe and you have options to get out of that situation. But always, always defend your community.
Brandon, I think I'd like to say that to anybody who's watching that isn't LGBTQ, I feel like empathy, Jan and Devin talked about it earlier, empathy goes a long way. And just being an empathetic person, or if you're a parent or you're an uncle or an aunt and you are around people that are of an age that they're still impressionable, teaching empathy just goes so far. My 15-year-old son is sandwiched in between an older sister who's LGBTQ and a younger brother who's LGBTQ. And just as important as teaching those two, that it is okay to be themselves, it is equally important for me and my husband to teach the 15-year-old that it is okay for them to be themselves, and that it is not okay for him to not stand up for people like his brother and his sister. Especially because he's a freshman now in high school. And I know that in middle school, you kind of go along with the crowd, high school too. but I'd like to think that if somebody in his peer group was being crass or inappropriate or downright homophobic, even though he's straight, and them knowing that he's straight, that he would have the wherewithal to say something and speak up, even though his siblings aren't physically there with him, and say, that's not appropriate and that's not okay. Why did you think that I would be okay with you saying those things? And have a conversation about it. I think that that is very important. And you don't have to belittle the person, like Steve said earlier. You know, you don't have to make them feel stupid or ignorant. But I feel like the straight allies and straight parents can really be helpful with making sure that the younger people don't tolerate that type of behavior from others. Because, you know, I know that my middle child probably has seen that happen at his school, not to his siblings, but to kids that he knows are out or aren't out, but everybody knows that they're LGBTQ. And I would like to think that as a parent, I did right by him by empowering him to say something, right? See something, say something, applies to everybody that's discriminated against: women, people of color, people with disabilities, LGBTQ community. You just need to be an empathetic person and know when to speak up for somebody else.
Yeah, I think your point there, Maria, is exactly right. If I can just add something real quick before I close this out, you know, it's tough living in the world that we live in right now, and it can seem like with the circus that is going on nationally, that we're not headed in the right direction, and with some things we may not be. But I think that, you know, our younger generations are definitely pulling us in the right direction. And for anybody who is not part of the LGBTQ plus community, we just need to know that you are there, and we need to know that you will be an ally for us, and that we have space in your lives. And if you can start from that place and be empathetic, like Maria said, I think it really gives you a solid foundation to build on, even if you don't know everything. I mean, I'm part of this community and I don't know everything, and I don't know that I ever will. But it's very important to have that stepping stone. So that was our final question. I want to thank everybody who was on our panel for sharing your story, because all of them, every single one, was extremely powerful, and it's necessary that we hear them. And I want to thank everybody who was watching for participating, submitting questions, and just watching and taking this in. You know, it's that first step that I talked about that's very important for you if you're trying to learn about our community. I'd like to also say that, you know, we're all encouraged by the fearlessness of the panel tonight and the activism that you've shown this evening just by being part of our panel and speaking up is something that is so stellar that I just can't even put it into words. It doesn't seem like much, but talking openly about our experiences is a necessary form of activism that is often taken for granted. And one final thing, please vote on November 3rd. Please vote. Make your voice heard. Get your mail-in ballot if that's what you're going to do. If you want to go to the polls, be safe about it. But whatever you do, it is absolutely 100%, no holds barred. I can't stress it enough. I could continue to go on, but I want to watch the convention. You have to vote. So please do it. Okay? All right. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Big round of applause for everybody, and have a good evening.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Peace out, everybody.
Thank you all for listening and being here. Bye.